The Arizona desert in the early 1880s was a place where a person's courage was measured not by the size of their revolver, but by how long they could last under the sun's relentless gaze. Heat shimmered over the land like a living thing, rising in layers from cracked red soil, sandstone ridges, and lonely roads worn down by wagon wheels. This was the landscape Claire Whitford rode through alone, determined, and perhaps a little too bold for a frontier woman traveling without escort. Claire wasn't lost at first. In fact, she knew the trail well. She had ridden it twice before while carrying books and slates to nearby Navajo camps. Her goal was simple: teach English to children who lived far from town, and in exchange, allow them to teach her their language. To her, that was fairness. To many settlers, it was foolishness. But Claire believed the West was big enough for more than one culture, more than one voice. What she did not believe foolishly was that the desert could turn on her so quickly that the wind started first. A thin whistle at her ear, a warning she barely noticed. By the time her mind registered danger, the horizon had already darkened. A wall of dust rose in the distance like a beast stretching its back, lifting higher and higher. Claire pulled on her reins. "Easy, copper, easy." Her Mari snorted wildly as the storm barreled toward them. Grit lashed Claire's face. In seconds the sky vanished, swallowed by earth and wind. She ducked low over the saddle, trying to see, but the world dissolved into a red-brown blur. The gusts struck hard, ripping her hat away, nearly tearing her from Copper's back. Then the horse reared panicked and the ground disappeared beneath Claire's feet. She hit the earth shoulder first, rolled, and felt the sting of sand forcing itself into her eyes and mouth. When she finally pushed up on shaky arms, Copper was gone. She was alone, blind, coughing, and half buried in swirling dust. Claire was certain she would vanish there, another nameless traveler claimed by the Southwest's unforgiving storms. She tried to stand, but the wind knocked her sideways again. Her hands trembled. She began to crawl, hoping she might find a rock to shield herself behind. Instead, she found a shadow. A tall figure stood before her, barely visible through the veil of sand. For a heartbeat, Claire thought her imagination had begun its final tricks. But then the figure moved deliberately, calmly toward her. A strong arm circled her shoulders. A blanket, coarse but warm, wrapped around her body to block the cutting wind. The man crouched beside her, lowering his face so she could hear his voice above the storm. "You must keep your head down," he said steadily. "The wind will pass. It always does." She blinked, forcing her dust-filled eyes open. His skin was bronzed deep by sun and time, his hair tied back with a strip of leather. Turquoise glinted faintly at his neck. A Navajo. She could see that even through the haze. Fear flickered inside her, not because of him, but because she suddenly knew how vulnerable she was. Yet he held no weapon in his hand, no threat in his stance. Instead, he shielded her with his own body, bracing against the storm as though he had done it 100 times before. "Stay close," he said. "I will take you to shelter." It was not a request. It was a promise. He guided her with steady hands, moving in the direction she could not see. Step by step, they walked through the storm's belly until the wind eased enough for Claire to spot the dark mouth of a shallow cave. Inside, blessed silence returned. The world stopped spinning. The stranger knelt and offered her a water skin. She took it with trembling fingers. "Thank you," she whispered hoarsely. I didn't expect anyone to be out here." He studied her face a moment, his expression unreadable but not unkind. "My name is Tajon," he said. "I scout these lands. The desert speaks if you listen." Today it said someone needed help. Claire swallowed, touched by the simplicity of his explanation. Outside, the storm still raged, but inside the cave she felt, for the first time since falling, safe. In that quiet, dusty half-light, She realized something the town never taught her. Not every stranger is danger. Not every story about the Navajo is true. And sometimes, salvation arrives from the direction you were warned most fiercely to avoid. The storm died as quickly as it had risen, leaving the desert washed in an eerie, coppery calm. When Claire stepped out of the cave beside Tajon, the sky was a brilliant blue again, the land smelling of fresh dust and distant rain. Her mare copper grazed nervously near a juniper bush, shaken but unharmed. Tajon had tied the reins to a branch with a careful knot. Claire couldn't hide her relief. "You found her too?" Tajon nodded once, lifting the blanket from her shoulders so he could shake the dust from it. A good horse returns if she trusts her rider. She waited. His matter-of-fact tone made Claire smile despite the ache in her limbs. There was something steady about him, like the mesas rising from the earth, unmovable and quiet. When she tried to mount, however, her legs wobbled. Tajon stepped forward without hesitation, offering his hand. His touch was firm and warm, supporting her weight with almost effortless ease. She felt heat rise to her cheeks, though she wasn't sure if it was from the sun or the unexpected intimacy. "You should rest before riding again," he said. "There is a place nearby." Claire hesitated. Returning to town immediately meant facing questions and judgments she wasn't ready for. Besides, the more time she spent with Tajon, the more she sensed there was something to learn from him. Something beyond the stories the settlers told. She nodded. "Lead the way." Entering the canyon, they traveled through a narrow pass carved by time and wind. The canyon opened like a great sandstone cathedral, towering walls glowing orange in the late afternoon light. Below, tucked between cottonwood trees and the silver ribbon of a small creek, was a Navajo camp, quiet, peaceful, humming with life. Claire's breath caught at the sight. Several women worked at looms, weaving patterns that mirrored the land zigzags of lightning, curves of rivers, diamonds shaped like stars. Children played tag among the rocks, shrieking with laughter. An elder sat on a blanket, shelling pine nuts with practiced hands. To Claire, it was a world she had only glimpsed from afar, softened and distorted by rumor. To Tajon, it was simply home. As they entered, the camp hushed. Adults looked up, alert but not hostile. Claire felt their eyes on her, curiosity mingled with caution. She straightened her posture, trying not to appear nervous. Tajon spoke a few words in Navajo, his voice calm, reassuring. The tension dissolved. A woman in a red woven shawl approached, her eyes sharp yet kind. Tajon introduced her as Shadi, his aunt. "She says you are safe here," Tajon translated, "and that you must eat. The dessert steals strength." Claire smiled gratefully. Shadi guided her to a shaded area where a pot of mutton stew simmered over the fire. Claire thanked her in the only Navajo word she knew, ahihi, and the woman's eyes warmed. Even the smallest effort to respect a culture opens a door. Lessons begin for both of them over the next several hours. Claire rested, drank water, and slowly recovered. The children approached her cautiously at first, but when they noticed she carried books in her saddlebag, curiosity broke through their shyness. "Do you teach?" one girl asked in accented English. "Yes," Claire said, smiling, "and I'd be happy to teach you." Soon she had a small gathering around her. She taught simple English phrases and helped them write their names in the dust with sticks. In return, the children taught her Navajo words sun, cloud, friend. Tajon watched from a distance, arms crossed, an unreadable expression on his face. But every so often Claire caught a softening in his eyes, as though something about her patience surprised him. When the children ran off to play again, he approached. "You teach without speaking down to them," he said thoughtfully. "Many settlers do not." Claire swallowed. "I teach because I want us to understand each other. The West doesn't have to be a battlefield." Tahone studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly, as if cataloging her words as truth. This quiet acceptance was the beginning of trust. A small moment of peace as evening came. Stars began to appear sharp and bright, untouched by smoke or lantern light. Claire sat by the creek, dipping her hands into the cool water. The smell of juniper drifted on the breeze. Tahone settled beside her, not too close. "Not too far. You were brave today," he said. Claire laughed softly. "I fell off my horse and ate dust." "Still brave," he insisted, a faint smile tugging at his lips. She glanced at him, at the calm strength he carried, at the quiet way he moved through his world. And she realized something. Trust didn't begin with grand gestures. It began with small moments like this shared silence, mutual respect, and the willingness to see each other clearly dot in the canyon shadows. Under an endless sky, their worlds had begun to meet. The morning sun filtered through the canyon like molten gold, lighting up the camp with warmth and promise. Claire had slept deeply for the first time in days, her body exhausted from the storm. Yet her mind felt alert, curious, and alive. She had already begun to notice the rhythm of the canyon, the way children's laughter echoed off sandstone walls, the murmur of the creek and the soft hum of looms as women worked side by side. Tahone had been up before sunrise, tending to chores and scouting for fresh water. Claire watched him from a distance, noticing how he moved with purpose, yet without haste. There was an ease in his motions that belied the harsh desert they lived in, like a man entirely in tune with the world around him. Today, however, he was at her side. A shared task Shadi asked Claire to help gather medicinal herbs that grew in the canyon's hidden nooks. Tahone accompanied them, carrying a small satchel and guiding them carefully along the rocky paths. The work was simple. Identify plants by their leaves. Learn which roots were safe for teas, which leaves were good for poultices, and how the Navajo had used these remedies for generations. Claire marveled at the knowledge woven into every step Tahone shared. He spoke quietly, offering gentle corrections when she misidentified a plant, yet never condescending. In turn, Claire shared her knowledge of Western herbal remedies, explaining how some remedies could be combined safely. Their dialogue was slow, deliberate, and respectful, a learning exchange rather than a debate. It was during this quiet cooperation that a small misstep changed everything. The moment of connection, Claire reached to pick a sprig of desert sage near a low rock, but the stone shifted beneath her fingers. She stumbled slightly, her balance unsteady. Before she could fall, Tahone reached out, steadying her with a firm hand. His fingers brushed beneath the fabric of her shirt and rested lightly on her waist. The movement was instinctive, reflex to prevent injury, but the pause that followed was something else entirely. The warmth of his hand and the quiet intensity in his eyes struck her. It wasn't lust, not in any crude sense. It was acknowledgement, recognition, respect. He didn't speak at first. Claire held her breath, unsure how to respond, feeling the solid, grounding presence of the man beside her. Then, almost reluctantly, he murmured, his voice soft and low, "Your skin carries courage." The words hung between them like the desert air, warm, unspoken, and profound. Claire felt a shiver run through her, not of fear, but of realization. She had come to the canyon thinking she was offering help. Yet here was a man, a stranger in many ways, recognizing something in her she hadn't even acknowledged herself, her resilience, her persistence, her bravery. Understanding beyond words, Claire straightened, meeting his gaze. There was no awkwardness, no impropriety, only a quiet, mutual understanding. She nodded faintly, her cheeks flushed, not with embarrassment, but with a subtle thrill of connection. "You make it seem easy," she said, trying to mask her nerves. But the desert has a way of teaching humility. Tahone's lips curved in a small, rare smile. Humility is the first lesson here, he replied. Courage comes after we learn it. In that single moment, Claire understood something important. Trust, respect, and courage were intertwined. The touch of a hand, the careful words, and the steady presence of another person could communicate far more than speeches or lessons ever could. Lesson in observation, they continued collecting herbs, now more mindful of each other's movements. Every glance, every step, carried an unspoken dialogue of patience and attentiveness. Claire noticed how Tahone observed her, not in judgment, but in careful consideration and acknowledgement that she was capable, intelligent, and worthy of respect. As the morning wore on, they laughed quietly when a small boy tried to mimic Tahone's careful steps and nearly toppled into the creek. The moment of tension had passed, replaced by warmth and shared camaraderie. Claire realized that the canyon had a way of teaching not just survival skills, but life skills, patience, observation, and the gentle power of human connection. A quiet promise by the time they returned to camp. The sun had climbed high, casting a warm glow over the children playing and the women weaving. Claire carried a small bundle of herbs, feeling stronger and more grounded. Tahone walked beside her, hands empty, yet somehow, the brief moment of contact lingered in the air between them like an invisible thread. It was not a promise of love yet. Not exactly, but a promise of understanding. And in the harsh, unpredictable desert, understanding could be as valuable as water or shelter. Claire Whitford rode back toward the settler town with copper under a cloudless sky. The canyon and Tahone's camp fading behind her. Her mind was heavy with the lessons she had learned, the sights she had seen, and the quiet strength she had discovered within herself. She carried knowledge not just of herbs, languages, and survival, but of something more delicate, the realization that people she had been taught to fear could also be allies, teachers, and friends. Yet the town would not understand that so easily. Whispers and glances word of her absence. Her trip to the Navajo Canyon and her association with Tahone had already reached the ears of the townsfolk. As she approached the main street, she noticed the familiar looks, the furrowed brows, the cautious avoidance, the whispered conversations that stopped when she drew near. Whitford's gone off to the Indians again. One woman muttered behind her hand. She's forgetting who she is, an older man said. We can't have our children learning from them. Claire's chest tightened, but she lifted her chin. She had known this would happen. She had known that teaching and uniting the children of different communities was not popular with everyone. Still, she had to try. The accusations the next day. A small group of settlers gathered outside the schoolhouse, their faces stern. They demanded explanations. Why are you teaching Navajo children? One man barked. Why are you consorting with Tahone? He is not like us. Claire's voice was calm but firm. Because knowledge does not belong to one people alone. Because children deserve more than fear and suspicion. Because we all share this land and we must learn to respect each other if we are to survive here. The men were unconvinced. Some threatened to remove her from the school, while others suggested she should leave town entirely. Claire felt the weight of the threat, yet there was no fear in her resolve. She remembered Tahone's words. Courage comes after we learn humility. She understood now that courage was not just surviving storms in the desert, it was standing for what was right, even when others opposed you. A difficult choice. Claire faced a decision. She could abandon her mission, retreat to the safety of her home, and conform to the town's narrow expectations. Or she could stand firm, knowing that her actions would bring both criticism and respect, and possibly change the minds of those around her. After a long night thinking by the window, watching the flickering lanterns in the quiet town, she decided she would not compromise her principles. She would not let fear dictate her actions. She would return to the canyon not to hide, but to ask Tahone for help, not because she was afraid, but because some battles required allies, and some bridges could only be built with guidance. Seeking Tahone's help the next morning, Claire saddled Copper once more and rode toward the canyon. Her heart raced, not with fear, but with anticipation. Tahone greeted her as she arrived, calm as ever, yet perceptive. "I need your advice," she said, dismounting. "The town is angry. Some want to stop me from teaching the children. Others threaten to remove me. What should I do?" Tahone listened quietly, nodding slowly. Then he spoke. "Teach them anyway," he said simply. "Not all hearts are ready to understand, but the seeds you plant today will grow tomorrow." Claire felt relief and gratitude. She realized that courage alone would not be enough. Wisdom and strategy were also necessary. Together, they began to plan how to demonstrate the value of unity and shared learning to the skeptical settlers. An educational lesson for the town, Tahone suggested. Organizing a gathering where both settler and Navajo children could showcase their knowledge and talents. He explained that seeing the children work together would teach the adults what words could not. Claire agreed, realizing that education was not just about reading or writing, it was about demonstrating respect, understanding, and cooperation in real, tangible ways. As the sun dipped behind the cliffs, Claire felt a renewed sense of purpose. The path ahead was not easy, but she understood something crucial. Standing for what is right often invites opposition, but compromise of principles brings only regret. With Tahone's guidance, she would continue to teach, to bridge worlds, and to build a legacy of understanding in a place that desperately needed it. Even amidst criticism and fear, the seeds of hope had been planted and they would grow. The canyon had never felt more alive. Birds chirped among the junipers, the creek sparkled like liquid silver, and the children ran between rocks and trees with laughter echoing against the sandstone walls. Claire Whitford looked around, her heart swelling with anticipation. Today was not about her. It was about teaching a lesson far beyond the classroom, one of respect, understanding, and courage. Beside her, Tahone stood tall, eyes scanning the horizon. The calm confidence he carried always seemed to steady her own nerves. Today that calm would be tested not by storms or wild animals, but by the skepticism and fear of the settlers. Preparing the gathering for weeks, Claire and Tahone had quietly planned. Invitations were sent to the townsfolk, worded carefully to avoid offense but to encourage curiosity. Children from both the settler town and the Navajo camps had rehearsed lessons, songs and demonstrations, reading aloud, counting, weaving simple patterns, and identifying plants and herbs. Claire moved among the children, giving last-minute encouragement. "Remember, we show them what we can do. Teach with your heart, not just your voice." Tahone worked with the older Navajo children, helping them prepare demonstrations of traditional skills, tracking, knot tying, and the art of building shelter. He spoke softly to them, emphasizing patience and pride. They will watch, but they must also listen. Respect teaches faster than words. The arrival of the settlers. By mid-morning, settlers began arriving, cautiously at first. Many had grim expressions, unwilling to see what they anticipated. Some muttered under their breath, others leaned on their canes, arms crossed. A few parents kept children close, whispering warnings. Claire stepped forward, brushing a hand along her skirts to steady herself. Her voice rang out, calm yet commanding. "Thank you for coming. Today, we share something important: knowledge, skill, and understanding. Let the children teach, and you will see the truth with your own eyes." Tahone nodded at her side, silently lending strength and credibility to her words. His presence reminded the settlers that respect and cooperation were not just ideas, they were practiced values. The demonstrations begin. The children took the center of a small clearing. Navajo children demonstrated weaving patterns and identifying desert plants, explaining their uses. Settler children read aloud simple lessons in English, demonstrating their knowledge of arithmetic and geography. Claire watched as a boy from the town hesitated, unsure how to interact with a Navajo classmate. Tajon stepped lightly to his side, giving a reassuring nod. Slowly, the boy relaxed and began to answer questions alongside his new friend. Laughter and conversation began to bridge the cultural divide, brick by brick. The adults were quiet at first, their expressions unreadable. But as the children's confidence grew and their collaboration became evident, even the harshest critics began to lean forward. One older man whispered to his neighbor, "Maybe we've judged too quickly." Another mother murmured, "I didn't realize how much they knew." Education, Claire realized, was never just about books, it was about experience. When people saw competence and courage firsthand, prejudice began to crumble. A lesson in unity after the demonstrations. Claire invited the children to participate in a cooperative task, building a small rock garden along the creek's edge. Both groups worked side by side, carrying stones, shaping patterns, and laughing when mistakes were made. Tajon offered guidance, showing them how to balance rocks and choose shapes, while Claire encouraged teamwork and patience. By the end of the afternoon, the settlers had begun to mingle with the Navajo families, sharing water, small meals, and conversation. Barriers that had seemed insurmountable earlier in the week were now starting to dissolve. Claire felt a swell of pride, not for herself, but for the children and the lessons they had taught everyone present. Quiet acknowledgement as the sun began to dip behind the canyon walls. Painting the sky in warm oranges and purples, Tajon stood beside Claire. They watched the children run along the creek, settling into the rhythm of laughter and mutual respect. "You did well," he said quietly. "No," Claire replied, shaking her head gently. "They did. And so did you." For the first time, she felt the weight of the town's expectations lift. The lesson was being absorbed not by force, but by seeing and understanding. In that moment, Claire realized that courage, education, and empathy could build bridges stronger than fear ever could. And though the road ahead would have challenges, today had proven that change was possible. The seeds of unity had been planted, and under the steady care of knowledge, respect, and shared purpose, they would grow. The canyon was bathed in late afternoon light, the cliffs glowing like molten brick. Birds settled into the junipers, the creek murmured a gentle farewell to the day, and the children of both Navajo and settler families were laughing as they finished a small game of tag. Claire Whitford stood at the edge of the creek, watching, her heart swelling with pride and relief. Months of planning, risk, and courage had brought them here, this rare moment of harmony. The settlers had begun to see the value in understanding the Navajo ways, and the Navajo children had learned more than English. They had glimpsed the kindness and curiosity of the settler community. Bridges had been built, quietly and deliberately, one respectful interaction at a time. And through it all, Tajon had been by her side. The first quiet celebration, the children returned to their lessons and games, leaving Claire and Tajon alone for a brief moment. He leaned casually against a rock, arms crossed, watching her with an expression that was both gentle and contemplative. "You did well," he said quietly, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Claire shook her head, smiling back. "No, we did this together. And the children did it. I only helped guide them." Tajon's gaze softened. "Still, it required courage. You have shown it, and they have followed. That is a gift." She felt a warmth in her chest, one that had nothing to do with the desert sun. It was understanding, recognition, and respect, the foundation of any true bond. A new school on shared land weeks later, with the settlers and Navajo elders' tentative approval. Claire opened a small school on neutral land at the edge of the canyon. It was modest, a single-room building made of adobe and timber, but it was a symbol of possibility. Children arrived early, carrying slates, notebooks, and Curiosity.Tahone helped construct the schoolhouse, guiding the children in carrying timber and arranging furniture. His presence reassured both the Navajo families and the settlers. Where fear had lingered, respect now took root. Inside the classroom, Claire taught reading, writing, and arithmetic. Outside, Tahone led lessons in tracking, plant identification, and the practical skills necessary to survive in the desert. Both cultures learned from each other, and the children thrived in the environment of shared knowledge. A moment of connection one quiet evening, after the day's lessons had ended and the children had returned to their homes, Claire walked along the creek with Tahone. The sun dipped behind the cliffs, casting long shadows across the sand and water. He reached for her hand, not forcefully, not with expectation, but gently, as if offering comfort and acknowledgement. They walked in silence for a few moments, watching the canyon turn from gold to amber. Then, with a subtle movement, Tahone's hand brushed lightly against her waist, echoing the moment months before when he had steadied her near the sagebrush. This time it was deliberate but tender. "Your courage? It taught me hope," he murmured. Claire smiled softly, feeling both grounded and exhilarated. In that simple exchange, words were not needed. The trust, respect, and shared experiences spoke louder than anything else could. Harmony in the canyon life settled into a rhythm. The children laughed and learned. Settlers and Navajo families began to interact more openly, sharing meals, knowledge, and traditions. Claire and Tahone worked side by side, learning from each other while teaching others. Their bond was quiet, steady, and rooted in mutual respect, a contrast to the wildness of the desert, but no less powerful. In the harsh land of the frontier, they had found stability not in ownership, but in understanding, cooperation, and shared purpose. The happy ending one evening. As the sun set behind the cliffs, painting the canyon in fiery oranges and purples, Claire and Tahone stood together at the edge of the schoolyard. Children's laughter echoed in the distance, and the desert air was cool and clear. "You were right," Claire said softly. "Change doesn't happen all at once. But it can happen." Tahone nodded. "It does if hearts are willing." They walked toward the canyon together, hands brushing lightly, carrying the quiet knowledge that they had not only survived the desert and its storms, but had helped two communities begin to understand each other. And in the soft glow of the red cliffs, Claire knew that courage, patience, and education could create bridges stronger than fear, prejudice, or isolation ever could. Under the vast sky of the West, there was peace. There was hope, and there was a future they could build together.